Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode, number 137, is non-mirror imaged flying geese units. First, a big shout out to Pat and Charlie from South Carolina. Thanks for stopping by the shop and introducing yourselves. I like to meet any and all viewers who come by. Be sure to say hello. Next, faux pas from last week. I read the information on the wrong quilt. The quilt I held up and am giving away is Flutter. I called it Amaryllis, but no problem. You put in Amaryllis in the comments, you are entered to win Flutter. So stay tuned for the winner and the announcement of next week's giveaway. Now, let's get to the episode. How did this all start? It started by a customer coming in and saying, "Can you find a better way to make this?" She had this book, which I've shown on the show many times before, and she wanted to do Dutch Rose on page 33 of this book. And it has a lot of pieces, and she said, I think there's got to be a better way to do this. So I said, sure, no problem. So what I like to do is take one of the diagrams and enlarge it so that I can see it better and see what I'm working with. There's lots of flying geese, lots of half square triangles, and in the end, they're still all going to be flying geese and half square triangles, but I like the construction method better in the fast flying geese method, and we're going to go through those in just one moment. Let's start with breaking down the pattern first. And the first thing I need to do is determine the sizes. And in this book, it has size blocks from 6 inches all the way to 14. The customer's already told me she wants to make the 14. So I look at the 14-inch block and say, what size are the flying geese? Now, I can tell from the measurements they tell you to cut by using Quilter's math, which we've discussed many times before. But the first thing that I like to do is look at the corner square, this A corner square that touches the flying goose. So that square in the 14-inch block was cut 2 1/4. So what does that mean? You take off the 1/2 inch seam allowance, and that means it finishes to 1 3/4. Now we know that the width and height are double. So you know that if it's 1 3/4 square, the longer side is 3 1/2 because 3 1/2 is double the 1 3/4. Next, you want to figure out the fabric placement. Now, if the fabric is the same in all the flying geese, then you don't need to worry about this. But in our example, we have C's and B's. You probably can't see that because they're blurry because I made it so much bigger. But there's one fabric on one side of the goose and one fabric on the other side of the goose. Now, in the center here, they're the same. So you would make these in your traditional way. But these we have to worry about. So the question is, are they mirror imaged or non-mirror imaged? If you did the fast flying geese method with the flying geese, you would get half with the C fabric on one side and B on the other, and then the other half with B on this side and C on the other. These are mirror images, and that would not work for this pattern. We need all of them to have C on one side and B on the other. These are non-mirror imaged. Let me take a break. I'm going to switch out the boards. We're going to go to the construction method choices. Ways to make flying geese. Many of you have used the rectangle method, where you take a rectangle and you take 2 squares for your sky, put them on the corner, sew on the diagonal, and then cut a 1/4 inch away. And what that gives you is a waist half square triangle on each side, each flying goose you make. And I don't like that method. It uses a lot more fabric. It puts more waste into your waste pile. It makes you think more of what ways can I use these. I would rather use less fabric. I got enough scraps as it is. I don't need to add to it. But it does work. Now, the next method that I learned was taking a large square, making 1/4 square triangles, and then taking 2 half square triangles and sewing them onto each side. Very little waste, but you had to sew exactly perfect to make it work. Now, this I refer to as cut first, sew second. Then came the fast flying geese method, which I call sew first, cut second. And in this method, I think most of you have done it before, and I like Deb Tucker's method because she bumps up her sizes of the squares you cut just a teeny tiny bit so that then you can trim them down and make them perfect. So in the fast flying geese, you take the big square, which would be this, but you don't cut it yet. You lay your 2 squares on top. You can draw a line here, or you can use many different methods to get to sewing on each side of the center by a 1/4 inch. And then you cut down the center and you get 2 units that look like this. You take your remaining 2 squares, you do this twice, so 1 square's here, 1 square's on the next one. And then after pressing, I would use my wing clipper, and this time actually, because of the sizes, I needed the wing clipper too. These are the less common sizes of flying geese, but I did need it for making this size unit. So it's the same thing. You still have 4 small squares that get cut in half and become 8 half square triangles, and you have 1 big square that gets cut into 1/4 square triangles. The difference is by cutting it second after it's sewn, if you don't sew perfectly, you trim up to perfect, which is why I like the wing clipper Deb Tucker methodology. Now let me show you how I made the non-mirror imaged units. So in my example, I'm making 2 3/4, 1 3/4 by 3.5 inch flying geese. So I refer to my chart in the instructions for the wing clipper 2, and she gives me what you need to cut. She, being Deb Tucker, gives you what you need to cut to make the right size pieces. So I follow her instructions and I make 1 big square. And if I did the traditional method, but just tried 1 on one side and 1 on the other, then I would get half with 1 fabric on one side and the other on the other, and then this is flip-flopped. We don't want that. So how can I make it work? Well, I cut my squares into half square triangles and laid them on top of the goose square. And I actually, here I have a pin in here, but when I actually did it, I just used a little bit of my Elmer's glue stick just on the what would be in the seam allowance to hold it on to get to the sewing machine. But I lay them on here just as I would if they were regular squares. And I go to the sewing machine and I sew down here on one side and down here on the other side. And I found the added benefit of this is you don't have to even draw a line because you can see it where you're going a 1/4 inch away from the center here. So once I sew these, I press them and I get 2 units that look like this. And then I take 2 more half square triangles, and the only thing you have to be careful of is that you're putting the correct fabric on the correct side. So I definitely want this to be the blue one because I want it to pair up with the red. If I put the red here, I'd get a pink background or pink goose and red sky. I don't want red sky. I want one red, one blue. So just be careful that these are on the correct side. And then you do the same thing. You sew on both sides of the center, press, and you get 4 units that are identical. And that's what we need for this. So it works exactly the same way, except for in this case, you have to cut your half square triangles so that they can get on the correct side. Once these are sewn, I've got my ruler, the wing clipper ruler, and I use it to trim them up so that my units are perfect. That's the way I would choose to do non-mirror imaged flying geese. Let's get to our winners. The winner of the amaryllis quilt, which is actually Flutter, is, I love this name, Sherry She Shed Sewing. Please send your mailing address to me at quiltersheaveninc@gmail.com and I will get that out to you right away. This week's giveaway is this Christmas quilt behind me. I showed it before. It was not claimed. It is 41 by 57 and a half. If you would like this quilt, you know what to do. You need to like this video, you need to comment, and you need to subscribe to my channel. And in your comment, write Christmas quilt. So good luck to all. I hope you all had a fantastic Thanksgiving and are going to have a great holiday season. So until next time, happy sewing.